In focus this week, the sound of gunfire on the streets of Philadelphia. It is not the kind of street violence that other cities are grappling with. Rather, it's gangsters killing gangsters, as organized crime factions have declared all-out war. Along with the World Series, there's another battle being watched in Philadelphia. It's the latest mob war. 8 shootings so far this year, and the normally peaceful streets of South Philadelphia are bracing for more violence. Mob wars have been a fact of urban life in America's cities for decades. What's different about this one, though, is that the battlefield has changed. The shootings have been out in the open, public places, like the South Philadelphia landmark, the Melrose Diner. In the most recent killing, reputed organized crime associate Frank Baldino was executed in the parking lot of the Melrose while the restaurant was crowded with dinner patrons. The car belonging to these people was sprayed with gunfire.
It was like 5 minutes. I was going to be done. I was going to be in the car. You know, I had my mother and my grandmother and her in the back seat, you know.
I got a little bit scared. I would have been sitting in the back seat.
In the old days, you wouldn't see a hit like that in Philadelphia.
Frank Wallace grew up here in South Philadelphia and went on to run the police department's organized crime unit.
The first opportunity they had, whack. They whacked them in front of, could be, 50 witnesses, 100 witnesses? And they showed a total disregard for the people that they live with down here.
And it's that disregard for innocent bystanders that has Philadelphia police so concerned. Gunmen recently tried to kill this man, Sicilian-born Frank Stanfa, who law enforcement officials call the head of the Philadelphia mob, by machine gunning his car on a city freeway during the morning rush hour. Stanfa escaped, but his son was critically injured. The authorities believe that Stanfa seized power after the conviction of mob boss Little Nicky Scarfo.
That vacuum has since been filled by Stanfa. However, there's a reluctance on, and we use the word Young Turks, of some of the Young Turks to respect Stanfa and his position at the head of organized crime.
Those Young Turks are, according to police, led by 31-year-old Joseph Skinny Joe Merlino. After the attempt on Stanfa's life, Merlino and Michael Chicky Cinglini were ambushed outside their Greenpeace social club. Merlino was wounded. Cinglini died.
I mean, they say it's a great job. I want to do this for a living. Little do they realize they can also do it for a dying.
The stakes in this war, not just the revenues from gambling, loan sharking, and drugs in Philadelphia, but a piece of the action in Atlantic City, New Jersey, an hour and a half south. With all that at stake, officials expect even more killings.
They'll follow their own set of rules, and their own set of rules is that they're involved in criminality 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They view you and I as squares because we work for a living. They're parasites on society.
2 grand juries have convened looking into the Philadelphia, southern New Jersey mob, and indictments are expected. But history in Philadelphia has a way of repeating itself.
Based on past history, what will happen is they'll continue to whack each other back and forth until the government finally comes down with their indictments. There'll be a whole slew of indictments. They'll all get arrested. They'll pack them off to jail. And then 2-3 years from now, they'll start all over again.
Philadelphia police say until they get the kingpins thereafter, all they can do is make life miserable for the mobsters. That includes pulling them over to spot check their cars and cracking down on things like sports betting. Crime and violence in this country will be among the topics discussed on NBC's Meet the Press tomorrow morning. The guest this week, Attorney General Janet Reno.
There is a bloody war going on in Philadelphia for control of organized crime. Today, the U.S. government tried to put a stop to it by indicting 24 alleged mobsters and hauling them in. Correspondent Richard Threlkeld has this Philadelphia takeover story.
As takeover bids go, this is about as unfriendly as you can get. In the past year, there have been at least 9 shootings and 5 dead on the streets of South Philadelphia in the war for mastery of the local underworld. Everything was quiet until the Philadelphia godfather, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, was sent off to prison for 69 years. Ever since, there's been a blood feud between Scarfo's alleged successor, John Stanfa, and some so-called Young Turks led by Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino, who was wounded in one of the shootings. Today, the government said enough.
These indictments make clear that we can and will protect society from dangerous, sophisticated criminal organizations.
A federal grand jury's indicted Stanfa and 23 others, and early today, FBI agents arrested most of them. They're charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. The government's basing its case on evidence from mobsters turned stool pigeons. Mobsters certainly aren't what they used to be.
The fact that people within the mob feel free to break their oath of silence. The fact that the bonds that tie them together are no longer honor and kinship and respect, but are power and greed. All of that is spelling the demise of the mob.
Authorities say the recent bloodshed is evidence of just how weak and divided the Philadelphia mob is just now. Odd as it may seem, the time to worry about mobsters is when they're not shooting at each other. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, New York.
If you believe the police, the underworld, once dominated by heavies like Sammy the Bull Gravano, Big Paul Castellano, and Fat Tony Salerno, has a new big shot, Skinny Joey Merlino.
We're giving out turkeys.
Philadelphia police believe Skinny Joey is as heavy as a crime boss can be these days.
All right, brother. Happy holidays.
This is where they hang.
For years, Joey Merlino has been the object of Detective Sergeant Walt Coughlin's attention.
There's a couple of his boys there.
Coughlin's been watching the mob for 26 years. He remembers when Joey Merlino was born.
Joey Merlino, true or false? Extortion?
Yes.
Loan sharking?
Yes.
Narcotics?
I would say he has people dabbling in it, yes.
He's down the corner over there.
It's not hard to keep track of Merlino. He even allowed us to follow him. Not to talk, but to watch. While the others in this South Philly storefront smoked cigars and played cards, Merlino talked softly on his cell phone. He has no visible means of support, no clearly visible means of support. But he drives a flashy car, dresses in flashy clothes, and throws a big Thanksgiving party for disadvantaged kids.
How are you? First, they're going to eat like a Thanksgiving dinner, turkey, everything. And then after that, Santa Claus, and they'll open their gifts.
Thank you, Jonas.
My pleasure. Happy holidays.
You're my idol.
Joey Merlino makes friends with everybody. Yeah. Everybody, except the people that want to kill him.
Organized crime isn't what it used to be.
You got something to say, Tony? Thank you.
Joey Merlino, according to investigators, is the head of a broken family, divorced from its own grand past when godfathers ruled vast criminal empires.
I think Joey is the next generation of the American mob, if you will.
George Anastasia follows the mob almost as closely as the police do. He watched as the old criminal empires were crippled by gunmen and lawmen.
And they've been able to bring down one family after the other, one boss after the other. So maybe in a sense, you're better off being kind of a guerrilla mob boss. You know, bounce around, a small group of guys.
And at least in his neighborhood, everybody knows Joey's name.
Oh, Joey Merlino.
Yeah. You know Joey Merlino?
Oh.
You could say Merlino is a big fish in a small pond, but it's more like a fishbowl. Every move he makes is watched closely by police.
Prosecutors have been attacking the mob using powerful new laws that mandate stiff sentences and huge fines. The experts say anyone who wants to be a boss today is either exceptionally strong or exceptionally stupid.
Nowadays, if you take over the control of what remains of a crime family, you might as well just put a sign around your neck that says, "Indict me very soon, please."
You slammed the door on me.
Merlino doesn't say much about the mob, but his lawyer, Joe Santaguida, says all the talk about Merlino is just talk.
They've been saying the same things for 3-4 years, and for 3-4 years, he hasn't been arrested, thank God.
Maybe he's got a good lawyer.
Well, a good lawyer gets you out of it once you're arrested.
The police say Merlino will be arrested sooner rather than later, but they've been saying that for years. Meanwhile, Skinny Joey is living high on the hog, while the cops bide their time looking for their next trophy in a game they say has become a lot easier to play. In Philadelphia, I'm Richard Schlesinger for Eye on America.
Reputed Philadelphia crime boss Joey Merlino will be in a Florida courtroom this morning. He is the man there on the left in this file video. Merlino was indicted last week as part of an organized crime ring crackdown spanning several states. He spent almost 12 years in federal prison on a racketeering conviction and was released in 2011. A federal judge in West Palm Beach will decide whether Merlino should be released on bail.
Arguments continue today in federal court in Center City, Philadelphia. It's the Merlino trial. Action News reporter Kathy Gandolfo has the story.
polluted sources and masters of deceit. That's the way defense attorney Nyalina Caravasos described the government's witness in the trial of reputed mob boss Joey Merlino and 6 co-defendants. Caravasos represents defendant Frank Gambino, charged with attempted murder, dealing in stolen goods, and conspiracy. She told the jury that Gambino has never owned a house or a flashy car and has never been a member of the mob.
Mr. Gambino is the sorriest excuse for a made member of a money-making organization that you have ever heard of in your entire life. Or he really, really is not one of them.
Caravasso said that Gambino, who turned 69 today, is not related to the notorious Gambino crime family of New York. In a methodical fashion, she attacked the testimony of mob turncoat Ralph Natale and other government witnesses for lying on the stand in order to gain the government's favor. Of one witness, Fred Angelucci, Caravasso said,
If they gave frequent flyer points for the amount of time spent traveling through the criminal justice system, he would hands down be the leader in number of points accumulated.
I wanted the jury to realize that when you calculate the government's evidence, it just does not add up for Mr. Gambino. It doesn't add up to him committing any crime, and it doesn't add up to him being a part of this alleged La Cosa Nostra.
Angela.
At 6:35, former Philadelphia mob boss Joey Merlino is due in a federal courtroom today.
The feds accuse him of associating with criminals, which is a violation of his probation. Fox 49's Steve Keeley live outside the federal courthouse in Center City with more on this and what might happen in court today, Steve.
Well, that's not going to happen today, that argument. What they're going to argue today is where to have that argument. I know that sounds silly, but that's how the jurisdiction works when it comes to arguing whether the jurisdiction should be here in Philly at this courthouse or down in Florida, where Merlino lives now and where the federal government contends he met with those ex-convicts and felons that he's not supposed to meet with. So not the main issue being decided or even argued here today in Philly. But what is news is that Joey Merlino is back in Philly for the first time since he returned a couple of years ago for his father's funeral. So he's making a life down in Florida right now, wants to open a restaurant and have a legitimate life. And he says he didn't know those felons were in that bar when he went in there himself. So that's going to be the argument eventually, and where they decide to hold this argument is anybody's guess right now. But this will be the first time Joey Merlino was in this federal courthouse since he was convicted of several crimes back here in 2000 and eventually did 14 years in prison. The problem was, once you're out of prison and out of the halfway house, you are under supervised release, which is called parole. And during that 3 years of supervised release, you are ordered not to meet with any bad guys or good fellas. And that's what the federal government says he did just days before his supervised release period was due to end this summer. And strangely, after that's over, Chris and Carrie, you're allowed to meet and talk and fraternize with anybody you want. And so what's what's got him so mad here probably deep inside is that the federal government's going after him for something that was just, they filed their motion just 2 days before that probation period was going to end. So they're really going after him and trying to really get under his skin, probably, his side thinks.
And again, Skinny Joe's been out of prison now for what, 3 years, Steve?
Yeah, and you know what? That supervised release period ended in September, and they filed the motion just before that. So if it wasn't for any of that motion, he'd be free and clear right now under nothing. But that's why he's got to come here now, because they got that motion in just before the deadline.
All right, thanks for sorting it out.
Tonight, a judge has declared a mistrial at the racketeering trial of reputed Philadelphia mob boss Joey Merlino. Jurors at the federal trial in New York City told the judge they were deadlocked in this case. Prosecutors accused Merlino of muscling his way into gambling and health insurance schemes run by crime families on the East Coast. The defense told jurors Merlino was framed by turncoat mobsters. Merlino has lived in Florida since leaving prison back in 2011.
Notorious Philadelphia mob boss Joey Merlino has pleaded guilty to an illegal gambling charge in New York City. Merlino entered the plea today, part of a deal to avoid a retrial in a racketeering case. He was accused of profiting from gambling and health insurance schemes run by organized crime families on the East Coast. A February trial ended in a hung jury. Sentencing is set for September.